So we say meditation just briefly for 5 minutes, in and out breath, meditation. We break it down into 2 parts, pacification and introspection. Pacification is samatha part, introspection is vipassana part. And pacification is dealing with calming, relaxing, steadying, and stabilizing the mind, which we already have talked about in detail, the counting of it, the following, the stabilization. And we have now come to introspection. We spent many, many hours on 1, 2, and 3. And now we have, more or less, we say, elevate ourselves from just the techniques of stabilizations to a higher level of exploring the wisdom, the vipassana part of it. And without the vipassana part of it, we cannot get enlightenment. The pacification part of it is just to calm us down, because our mind is not calm. Our mind has been too desultory, too wandering. It's attaching to many, many externalities. Now we have to introspect, contemplating within us. So we've been dealing with introspection for quite a while, and introspection involves a lot of talking, a lot of understanding in it. And now we're dealing with introspection. And in introspection, we say, how do we introspect? First of all, we have to have the right introspection. Who is introspecting the subject? What is being introspected? The object. So in other words, we've got to have some concept in our mind which form the foundation, the parameters of our introspection. What kind of standard? What is right and what is wrong? What is regarded as wholesome? What is regarded as unwholesome? You have to have some parameters. You have to have some measuring yardsticks to introspect. Because I could have introspected the wrong morality, the wrong thing, right? So the right introspection requires 2 parts to it, and this is really important to understand it. The samprajana part means you have to have a clear and right understanding. You must clearly and rightfully understand it with full awareness in the introspection. You cannot be dreaming, you cannot be having a desultory mind or wandering mind or a sluggish mind. You have to have a clear understanding on the subject part of it. On you yourself, you must be willing to introspect. If you're not willing to even introspect, you just sit there doing nothing and just relaxing and just, I don't know what you're doing. I mean, you just sit there and trying to stabilize your mind, and if you're not doing an introspection, though you're not doing it right. So the subject must be willing to, must have full awareness, must be clear, must concentrate, must focus, must have a stabilizing mind, must be calm in order to introspect. That's the first requirement. And then there's a second issue to it. What's being introspected? What are the concepts involving introspection? The concept of introspection, prajna, is a state of pure consciousness. We use the Sanskrit word prajna, which is wisdom. We need the wisdom to introspect. And this prajna transcends worldly concepts or belief system that might impede perfect wisdom. So in other words, the kind of wisdom that we use must transcend worldly wisdom. Some worldly wisdom or intelligence, much of the intelligence, of the worldly intelligence, could impede, stop perfect wisdom. One of these concepts and belief that impede wisdom: lack of morality, sluggishness, not being kind, not compassionate, selfishness, egoistic, you name them. All these impede wisdom. You don't want to get that into your introspection, right? So you need something that transcends all these mental afflictions, transcends ignorance, that transcends hatred, transcends jealousy. Okay, you need that. And you need wisdom that transforms temporal consciousness into the ultimate understanding of the true nature of existence and reality. You're looking for understanding of true existence. Talking about existence, this word is very important. What is existence? Out of all the animals, only human beings try to understand existence. A dog will not try to understand, why do I exist? What's my what wisdom I should have? And because the animals only react to externalities. When they are hungry, they try to eat. When they are hungry and they have nothing to eat, they will hunt. When they're angry, they roar. So out of all beings, only the human beings questions, try to introspect, look for, explore wisdom. The wisdom of it, because they know that I have an existence. Why do I have an existence? Where do I come from? They question. The human beings have the ability, have the wisdom to question it, whereas animals, they don't have the ability, they don't have that kind of wisdom to explore it. So are we not going to value, appreciate that kind of ability and explore into existence? And such understanding is prajna, which leads to enlightenment. Put it simple, we need the right introspection, the right subject and the right object. The subject is one, you, right? You, me, we introspect. But the objects are so multifaceted, so various. Because the Buddha talked about prajna in varieties of ways. Because the Buddha talked in accordance with the wisdom level of the audience. It always changed. Because it tailored to who needs what. So there are so many prajna issues, prajna concepts. But there are some basic ones that we need to have in order to introspect. So in other words, the Buddha's been talking about prajna in a variety of ways that even if we exhaust our ability and our lifetime, we may not be able to explore all of it. But we need some very basic ones that would allow us to get into understanding, true understanding. So we need some basic concepts. Plus, if you're all flooded with all kinds of prajna concepts, you don't know, you may not, in studying Buddhism, we try to understand one concept, and you go into the next. If you're all confused with different concepts that you don't understand, you cannot introspect properly. So it is very important that we have some basic concepts to serve as a measuring yardsticks to explore into wisdom. It's just like in a society. If we don't have any measuring yardsticks of morality, you'll be in trouble. We'll all be in trouble. You can kill, you can steal, you can have sexual misconduct, you can do all kinds of things. But the society needs a norm to work with, needs some parameters to work with. What are these? Some basic concepts required in the right introspection. We say the 4 seals of the Dharma, the 4 foundations of introspection. We call it Satipatthana. We have introspection of the body, introspection of feelings, of consciousness, of all dharmas. And then we also have introspection of the 5 aggregates, introspection of dependent origination, paticca samuppada. Paticca samuppada explore into reasons, the whys, the hows of existence. Because as I said, out of all the animals, only human beings have that ability, have that capacity, have that willingness to explore into existence. Only the wiser, the more intelligent species of existence, explore into existence, not just take existence for granted. And then we also have introspection on Yogacara, which Nakti Matra Tata, and then number 6, the 37 factors of enlightenment. If we understand these concepts more or less with thorough understanding of it, and then we interact with externalities, we already have all the security guards inside of us. We already have well equipped with all the knowledge in us to confront a cruel reality, a hard reality, or to jump over hurdles of life. We have to have enough of these concepts spoken by the Buddha. In this session, why don't we just deal with the first one, the simple one, the 4 seals of the Dharma, the trademark of Dharma, so that if anybody talk about any Dharma not within this seal, that's not what the Buddha talked about. So we must not attach to those, because they could be about struggling for fame, for reputation, for wealth, for personal pursuits, and not within the parameters of what the Buddha taught. All right, so let's get to the 4 seals, the trademark, the stamp. Say, this is what we should understand, the 4 standards. So we say the 4 seals of the Dharma, Kastu Loksana, the 4 characteristics of all conditions of samsara. First one, impermanence. All phenomena are impermanent. So if someone said to you that, I believe in permanence, there is a creator who permanently exists and who would permanently look after you, they know, oh, this is not what the Buddha is talking about. Or there is a God that is permanent. Oh, that's not what the Buddha is talking about. And you need to understand permanence. What is permanence? What is impermanence? Nothing is permanent. So even the creator is not permanent. How can there be a creator? Nothing is impermanent. We'll say even God is not permanent. Last session we have a God discussions about what and where and how God exists, and we already talked about it in detail. So impermanence, nothing is permanent. You name me a thing that is permanent. You name me anything that would stay all the time. Even if I die, it will still stay all the time. You think the world is permanent? The world that I'm living in is permanent? You think this building is permanent? Before the First World War and the Second World War, everybody believed that all structures are permanent. And then boom, and then nothing is permanent. There's no physical permanence. There is no metaphysical permanence. Even what you think about a thought is not physical, but that is not permanent. Even a philosophy is not permanent. Even a scientific theory is not permanent. Who discovered gravity? Who initiated gravity? Newton, right? Newton said gravity. When we throw an apple in the air, it drops down. It won't fly up to the air. It would always drop down because of the theory of gravity. It always dropped, right? And then Einstein said, no. Einstein expounded the theory of relativity, not gravity. So gravity is more or less, we wouldn't say opposed by, but more or less argued by, not totally accepted by, an exposition of relativity. So even scientific theory, philosophy, nothing is permanent. So impermanence, we understand it, right? There's no question about impermanence. But a question may come up, because when people go to lectures, they always say, hey, what you're talking about is theoretical. How does it benefit me by knowing impermanence? I know everything is impermanent, so how does it benefit me to get what I want in society. You think about how the theory, or not the theory, the philosophy of impermanence. What does impermanence mean? Impermanence means changeability. Everything changes. Nothing is not changing. The good can change to be bad, and the bad can change to good. The good can be better and the better best. The better could be worse. Everything is changing. So, when everything is changing, there's hope. You don't always bury yourself in depression. I'm always depressed. There is a time when you wake up. There's a time when you're not depressed anymore. There's a time when you're away from the depression. There's always hope. Impermanence gives us hope. If everything is permanent, there's no hope. If good is always good and bad is always bad, so if I'm bad, I will always be bad. So there's no hope. So impermanence gives us hope because it changes. But the most important thing is, how do you change it? How to change it? Towards what position are you going to change it? So that if you're in a very bad situation, I'm going to build up conditions for a good change. I know what is good and what is bad. I want to point towards changing to the good side, changing to the wholesome side. That's the reason why we have all these concepts. So impermanence, I'm not going to deal with it in detail anymore because I talked about it last time too. Second, non-self. And somebody asked a question, what is non-self? Anatman. And in the Pali languages, anatta. All existence is devoid of inherent nature. Inherent nature or inherent existence. Existence, that's a very important word because we all think that we exist. There were some philosophers back in at the beginning of the 19th century and they are called existentialists because they believe that we all exist. The fact is we all exist. We all exist, we go through hardship, we have happiness sometimes, we have sadness sometimes, and all this, democracy or dictatorship, all these things, we're confronted with all that, we just live, we are existing. And existence sometimes is suffering and sometimes it's happiness. Don't explain anything else, just the existing. We are existing. And they think existence is a fact. And then the Buddha said, no. The existentialists point out there's existence. The mistake is in existence. We wrongly believe in existence. There is no existence. Why don't we there's no existence? Because all existence is devoid of inherent reality. That's difficult to understand. What does that mean? All existence is devoid of inherent reality, inherent essence. How do we understand it? How do we approach to understand it? It's difficult to understand. What is non-self? And let's get a little bit more detail into it. What is non-self? There's non-self of individual, and there's non-self of all dharmas. Because other than me as an individual, everything is non-self. I am non-self. I don't have a permanent existence. I'm non-self, and everything is non-self. Now let's talk about the individual first. Anatman, that's individual first. 人无我, 法无我. First of all, the individual is composed of the 5 Scanters, the 5 aggregates. An individual is nothing but a combination of the body and mind. You, me, we're a combination of the body and mind. We are composed of the 5 aggregates, the 5 Scanters. What are these 5 Scanters? Let's get a little bit more detail into the 5 Scanters. The 5 Scanters, Rupa, that's the first Scanter, the body or the form, molecules, the atoms, anything that is solidity, that is anything that has the 7 elements. Form, solidity of it. Everything is solid, right? You can't see through it. It takes up space. Form takes up space. Rupa. Fluidity, the water. Heat, the temperature. Moving, the oscillation, the movement. Space, right? Element of space. If there's no space, how can there be water in the space, temperature, form in the space? And other than that, we also have perception, perceiving form, fluid, heat, moving, space. And then, of course, there's consciousness. These are the 7 elements of rupa. But rupa, basically, it's the form, the aggregates. And of course, there is someone, that is an individual, who understands this form. So basically, it's matter, fluid, heat, and what? Air, right? What is air? Say, take the body as an example. What is air? What is moving? What is the oscillation of it? The breath, right? The oxygen, all the air, all the nitrogen, whatever you name it, all the movement inside the body. The air facilitates movement. If a body does not contain air, there's no movement. If there's no movement, we're dead to this air. Heat, if there's no temperature, there is no birth and no existence and no non-existence. So there must be temperature that keeps it going. And how about fluid? Imagine if the body has no water into it. Is it a body anymore? How about solidity? If the body has no nails, the hardness of it, the nails, the teeth, the hair, the no bones. So the body is the combination of all these elements of this solidity, fluidity, temperature, and oscillation, or the movement. And there's space in between this too. And there's also a perception and a consciousness in the brain part of it, the mentality part of it. But basically, that's rupa. The 5 aggregates, first of all, rupa, our body. Considering the individual, the body. Considering the outside of the individual, everything we see, we sense, we perceive is nothing but the 5 elements. Matter, water, heat, air, space, perception, and consciousness. That almost includes everything. That's the first aggregate. Second aggregate, Vedanta, perception. The individual perceives with the 6 organs, the eyes, the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, the mind, in contact with the 6 sense objects, the form, the sound, the smell, the taste, the bodily impressions, and the mental objects. So in other words, the 6 sense organs interact with the externalities of the 5 externalities, the 6 externalities. The form. This is the form. The eyes interact with it. The sound, the ears interact with it. The smell, nose interact with it. The taste, the tongue interact with the body impressions. The touch interact with it. Mental objects, the brain interact with it. So when you interact, you perceive, there is sensation. There is perception. There's perception in it. That belongs to the mentality part. Sanjna, the conceptual part. The mental functions of shaping it, coloring it, conceptualizing it, the length, the pain, the pleasures and everything, the sensation of it. The conceptions give rise to sensations, and then also the samskara out of it. And then carry into action. When you feel unhappy, you may cry, you carry into action. When you feel happy, you may smile, you may laugh. When you feel depressed, then you're emotional. So that's volitional actions expressed out. And then there's also the storage part of it, the consciousness, the perceptive part, the cognitive part, and the egoistic part. So we have the seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, bodily sensations, and mental consciousnesses. And then we also have the manas, which is the 7 consciousness, the ego consciousness. You always attach your self to it. This is mine. That's yours. This is my interest. I, we, you, he, she. And then there's also the alive consciousness, which is a banking consciousness for whatever karmic energy produced and stored into it, and that's responsible for reincarnation, rebirth, karmic energy, all that is stored in a bank. That is your memory chips of the computer, of your computer. So these are the 5 scanters. So when we say non-self, which one is you? Is the body you, yourself? Is the body you as a self? If it is a self, which means that it is an entity, it always exists. It exists permanently. It exists by its becoming. It exists without conditions. But can you exist without conditions? If you have a self, that self, the definition of a self is that's an entity by itself. But we only exist in the form of activities, not in the form of entity. Activities always changes. One action leads to another. We live with activities, but we don't live with an entity. An entity is permanent. An entity is unconditioned. And an entity is always created by its own becoming. But there's no such thing. This body exists on conditions. It has no inherent permanent reality, because this body is going to die. It's like we'll have a string. One end is being born, the other end is death. Birth and death. Birth and death is the same string. It's not a different string, it's the same string. When you're born, you're bound to die. You're bound to die. So that's the same string. But we always recognize being born, and we always lament on dying. When a baby is born, okay, happy birthday, we got a baby. But the baby is destined to die. It does not have a permanent existence. It's devoid of inherent existence. It's devoid of inherent self-nature. It does not have a self. By definition of a self is permanent, a self is non-changing, a self exists all by itself. But no, we exist on conditions. If your mom and dad didn't come together in a certain circumstances and give rise to you, when the biologically speaking, when the spermatozoa is not fusing with the ovum, you're not going to be here. It's because your mom and dad comes together, the conditions fulfill for these young couples come together, and that specific conditions, some conditions will never be right for giving birth to a baby. Then many conditions fulfill that you become a self, but you don't have a permanent existence. Some people get scared on this. If I don't have an existence, who am I? I don't have an existence. Where am I? We don't have an existence, but we have a liar consciousness. We have a tainted consciousness, a tainted conglomeration of karmic energy that bring us life after life. And the Buddha said, transform that alaya consciousness into buddhi, into, if we can use that word, eternity. If we can use that word, into ultimate bliss, into transcendence from life and death. We transcend life and death. The perception, is the perception you? Is that feeling of pleasure you? Is that feeling of displeasure you? No. This is just a feeling. How can you identify yourself as that feeling? The reason why we have depression is, I am depressed. But if you say, this depression is a feeling, I'm going through it, I'm watching it, I'm living with it, it's just a feeling, it's not my real self. But the one who's depressed always identify himself with, I am depressed. It's just your mentality is depressed. You just watch, you just live with the depression. When a person is depressed, he's in the depression. He's not out away from it. It's very difficult to walk out of depression, but you have to know that, okay, this is now a period of depression, but that depression is not me. This is just a feeling of depression. But the depression comes, let it come, and let it go. Because it's not you. It's not you. Samskara, it's the conceptualization you. It's just a conceptualization. Even prajna is not you. We receive the conceptualization to think, but it's not you. Sometimes you have the right conceptualization, sometimes you have the wrong conceptualization. And how about the Vijnana? All this consciousness, that consciousness is only a temporary you. And when you're enlightened, the alive consciousness is transformed into prajna, which is leading to enlightenment. So none of the five Scanters, none of each five is you. The combination of not you is not you. If they are combined together, they're still not you. Well, you have to think about it before you know it. For non-self, okay? So there's no self. What we call self is actually lack of inherent existent reality, impermanence, interdependent on individuals and things. It is on causality. We exist on causality. We don't have a true existence. And how about all things? All things, anything that is svabhava is by definition unconditioned. What does that mean? Svabhava means that particular thing does not depend on causes to come into being. That particular thing is permanent. And that particular thing comes into existence all by its own ability, all by its own becoming. It does not need any conditions. It just, boom, exists. Is there any such thing in the world that exists? Svabhava? Everything is causality. Everything depends on causes, and they are independent on each other to exist. So, we know that anything that exists must be conditioned, depending on causes. Thus, the existence of svabhava is impossible. Okay? So, that's non-self. And then we say, why do we always think that we have a self? That's a delusion. A person's sense of having a distinct self comes from the five Scanters: body, sensation, perception, volition, and consciousness. We experience the world through the five Scanters, and as a result, attach to, cling to things and experience suffering. Because we attach, because we think we have an existence, we attach to what we want, what we desire. We're attached to possession, we're attached to occupation, we're attached to hatred, greediness, we're attached to relationship, male and female relationships. We're attached to these things and think that we require them. We think that these are what we want, cravings that lead us to experience suffering. The Buddha said, if you walk away from those, you will slowly walk away from suffering. But who can? We know about it, but we can never walk away from it so far. You think the alcoholic standing at the front of the liquor store does not know that liquor is not good for them? They probably know. You don't have to give them theories. You don't have to say, oh, get onto the internet. This is the disadvantages of drinking alcohol. They all know that. But they're so obsessed with it that they can't change. How do people obsess to the mass media? How do people obsess to certain tendencies? They can't get away from it. They have to train themselves because they experience these things through ages. They're so, everything that they've experienced is so indelible in their heart, so infringed in their heart, so deep that they can't get rid of it. It takes training. The Buddha said, the earlier the training, the easier for you. And some people never go through that training, even at death. They still bring the karma to the next life. The Buddha said, train yourself to let go of these. You need the training, not just talking about it. What is this training? Samatha and Vipassana. This other training. Right now we go through training. But coming here for 2 hours per Saturday is certainly a tip of the iceberg. You need the 24 hours training to get enlightenment. And all right, so this is self. So we have explained non-self. And next time I still have to go through the 4 seals of the Dharma, suffering and nirvana. Now that we know the parameters of our introspection, the concepts, we know that nothing is permanent, nothing is self. Don't say, this is me. How come you say to me like that? How come you're hurting me? I heard something that you said I don't like. You are infringing on me. I mean, there's always me, you, he, she. And we can never get away from this cocoon of egoism. You may not notice it. Every word you utter, every thought comes up in you is me, is I. I always consider myself first. Would you consider other people first? No. I want this, I don't want this. Get away. You don't hurt me. Everything is me, I. And can we get rid of this self? The Buddha said, let go of the ego. Let go of the self. We can't even stabilize our mind. Learn to stabilize your mind first, and then you slowly introspect into the parameters of impermanence, into the parameters of non-self. You always have to contemplate impermanence. Always have to contemplate no self. Not just within this 1 hour, when you look at the PowerPoint, oh yeah, impermanence. Oh yeah, non-self. When you walk out, it's not anymore.